The crystal chandeliers sparkled above as waiters in crisp white uniforms moved through the crowded penthouse. Margaret Chen stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she checked her phone for the third time in 2 minutes. Outside, the Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly, but she barely noticed it anymore. This was just another Thursday evening, another charity event, another room full of people who wanted something from her. She had built her tech empire from nothing, or so she told herself. 58 years old and worth $3 billion, she had earned her place in this world. Tonight's event was raising money for young artists, which her PR team said would look good in the press. 200 guests had paid $10,000 each just to walk through her door. Everything was perfect. The champagne was flowing, the conversation was buzzing, and the donations were already exceeding expectations. Everything was perfect until her assistant rushed over with panic written across her face. "The pianist isn't coming," she whispered urgently. Margaret's jaw tightened. "What do you mean he isn't coming?" "Food poisoning. He called from the emergency room 20 minutes ago. I've been trying to find a replacement, but everyone good is already booked." Margaret closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She had specifically requested classical piano music for tonight. The acoustics in her penthouse were incredible, and she wanted her guests to experience that. More importantly, she had mentioned the pianist in conversations with several major donors. "Find someone," she said flatly. "I don't care who. Just make it happen." Her assistant nodded and hurried away, already dialing numbers on her phone. Margaret plastered a smile back on her face and turned to greet a group of investors. The show had to go on. In the kitchen, Rosa Delgado was refilling trays of appetizers when her phone buzzed. She had worked as Margaret's housekeeper for 15 years, managing the penthouse and the 3 other properties Margaret owned. She knew every corner of these homes better than Margaret did. She also knew to stay invisible during events like this. The text was from Margaret's assistant. "Does your son still play piano? We need someone now, emergency." Rosa's heart skipped. Her son Diego had been playing piano since he was 7 years old, teaching himself on a cheap keyboard she had bought at a thrift store. He was 19 now, working night shifts at a warehouse while taking online classes. But he had never stopped playing. Music was in his blood, she texted back quickly. "Yes, he plays." "He's good." The response came immediately. "Can he be here in 30 minutes? "We'll pay $200. Rosa hesitated. Diego would be nervous. He had never played for people like this. But $200 would help with his tuition, and maybe, just maybe, someone would notice his talent. She called him. "Diego, I need you to do something for me." 28 minutes later, Diego pushed through the service entrance carrying his sheet music in a worn backpack. His mother met him there, quickly brushing invisible lint off his shoulders. He was wearing the only dress shirt he owned, slightly wrinkled from being stuffed in his closet. "Just play like you always do," Rosa whispered, squeezing his hand. Don't be nervous, but Diego was nervous. His palms were sweating, and his heart hammered against his ribs. He had performed before, at community centers and small cafes in his neighborhood, but never anywhere like this. The penthouse was bigger than the entire building where he lived. Margaret's assistant appeared and looked him up and down with barely disguised disappointment. "You're the pianist?" Diego nodded, not trusting his voice. "Fine, come with me. You'll play for 2 hours. Background music only. Nothing loud or dramatic. These people are here to talk and network, understand?" "I understand," Diego managed to say. She led him through the crowd, and Diego felt every eye on him. His shirt suddenly felt too tight. His shoes, borrowed from a friend, pinched his feet. He didn't belong here, and everyone could see it. The piano sat in the corner of the massive living room, a black Steinway grand that probably cost more than his mother made in 5 years. Diego had only played on instruments like this a few times, at the music store downtown when the owner let him practice before opening. Margaret was standing near the piano, deep in conversation with an older man in an expensive suit. Her assistant touched her elbow and whispered something. Margaret glanced at Diego for less than a second. "You're the fill-in?" she asked, not really looking at him. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Rosa's son. Rosa?" Margaret looked confused for a moment, then nodded absently. "Oh, right. Well, just play something pleasant. Nothing too complicated. Keep it quiet. Background music." She turned back to her conversation before Diego could respond. He stood there for a moment, invisible, then slowly walked to the piano bench and sat down. The keys felt cool under his fingers. He could hear the conversations around him, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. Nobody was paying attention to him. He was just part of the furniture, like the expensive artwork on the walls or the flower arrangements on every table. Diego closed his eyes and let his fingers find their starting position. His mother was watching from the kitchen doorway. He could feel her presence even without looking. She believed in him. She had always believed in him, even when nobody else did. He began to play. The first notes floated into the room, soft and gentle like Margaret had requested. But there was something else in the music, something that came from deep inside Diego's chest. Every note carried 15 years of his mother waking up at 5 in the morning, of her hands cracked and dry from cleaning supplies, of her smile when she came home exhausted but still asked about his day. A few people near the piano paused mid-conversation. One woman tilted her head listening. An elderly man by the window turned slowly, his eyes focusing on the young man at the piano. But Margaret didn't notice. She was laughing at something her companion had said, already planning her next business deal. The music was exactly what she had asked for. Pleasant background noise, nothing more. Diego's fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence. He transitioned into a piece he had written himself, inspired by the view from his apartment window, where the sunrise painted the brick walls gold every morning. The melody was simple but achingly beautiful, full of longing and hope. More guests stopped talking. They turned toward the piano, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. The music wasn't just technically perfect, it was alive. It breathed and pulsed with genuine emotion, the kind that couldn't be taught or bought. Near the entrance, a distinguished-looking man in his 70s stood completely still. Harold Zhang was one of the most respected orchestra conductors in the world, and he knew immediately what he was hearing. This wasn't just good. This was extraordinary. This was the kind of raw talent he spent his entire career searching for. He moved closer to the piano, watching Diego's hands, seeing the complete focus on the young man's face. Around him, more people were stopping to listen. Really listen, some of them for the first time all evening. But in the corner, Margaret was showing photos on her phone to a potential investor, completely unaware that something remarkable was happening just 30 feet away. To her, the music was exactly what she had ordered. Nothing special, just another detail checked off her list. Diego played on, pouring his heart into every measure, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. Diego's fingers danced across the keys as he lost himself in the music. The nervousness that had gripped his chest when he first sat down was melting away. This was where he belonged, where everything made sense. The expensive penthouse, the wealthy guests in their designer clothes, none of it mattered when he played. Music was the one place where he felt completely free. He shifted into a piece by Rachmaninoff, one of the most technically difficult compositions ever written. His hands moved with precision and power, racing up and down the keyboard. The melody soared and dipped, telling a story without words. Some pianists spent years trying to master this piece. Diego had taught it to himself by watching videos on his phone, practicing on his old keyboard until 3 in the morning after his warehouse shifts. Harold Zhang moved even closer, his mouth slightly open. He had heard this piece performed in concert halls around the world by pianists with prestigious degrees and decades of experience. But this young man, this boy in a wrinkled shirt, was playing it with a depth of feeling that took his breath away. Every note was perfect, but more than that, every note meant something. A small crowd had gathered around the piano now. Conversations were dying down as more people turned to listen. A woman in a red dress pulled out her phone and started recording. Then another person did the same. Within minutes, at least a dozen phones were pointed at Diego, capturing every moment. But across the room, Margaret was still oblivious. She had moved to the balcony with a group of investors, discussing her latest acquisition. Through the glass doors, she could barely hear the piano. Even if she had heard it clearly, she wouldn't have recognized what was happening. To her, the music was just another service she had paid for, like the catering or the flower arrangements. Diego finished the Rachmaninoff piece with a flourish and immediately flowed into something else. This time it was his own composition, something he had been working on for months. He called it Morning Shift in his mind, though he had never told anyone about it. The melody captured the feeling of walking home at dawn after a long night at the warehouse. watching the city wake up, seeing people start their day while his was ending. The music was hauntingly beautiful, full of quiet strength and dignity. It spoke of tired muscles and empty pockets, but also of pride and determination. It was the sound of his mother's hands folding laundry at midnight. It was the sound of dreams that refused to die no matter how hard life got. Rosa stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her face. She recognized the melody. Diego had hummed it while helping her clean apartments on weekends, while studying at the kitchen table, while fixing their broken radiator last winter. He had turned their life into music, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Harold Zhang pulled out his own phone, not to record, but to text his assistant. "Found him," he typed quickly. "The pianist we've been looking for. He's here, right now." A younger woman standing near Harold leaned over to her companion. "Who is this guy?" she whispered. "I've never heard anyone play like this." "I don't know," her friend whispered back. "But I'm recording everything." The first video hit social media at exactly 9:37 p.m. The woman in the red dress posted it to her account with the caption, "Accidentally discovered the most incredible pianist at a charity event." Who is this person? She had 40,000 followers, mostly people interested in classical music and the arts. Within 10 minutes, the video had 300 likes. Within 20 minutes, it had been shared 50 times. People were commenting, asking questions, demanding to know more. Another guest, a music journalist named Patricia who wrote for a major newspaper, posted her own video. Her caption was more detailed. "This young man is playing background music at a Billionaire's charity gala for young artists. The irony is painful. The talent is undeniable. This is what genius looks like when nobody's paying attention." Patricia had 200,000 followers. Her video spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, Diego had no idea any of this was happening. He was completely absorbed in his music, moving from one piece to another. He played Chopin with delicate emotion, then shifted into a jazz-influenced improvisation that made people tap their feet without realizing it. His musical knowledge was entirely self-taught, learned from library books and internet videos and countless hours of practice, but it was vast and deep. Margaret finally came back inside from the balcony, laughing at something one of the investors had said. She walked right past the crowd gathered around the piano without really seeing it. Someone tried to catch her attention, an older man she vaguely recognized from somewhere. "Ms. Chen," Harold said, touching her elbow gently. "I need to talk to you about your pianist." Margaret glanced at him, then at her watch. "Is there a problem? Is he playing too loud?" Harold blinked in confusion. "Too loud? No, you don't understand. This young man is extraordinarily talented. I'm the conductor of—" "That's wonderful," Margaret interrupted, smiling but not really listening. "I'm glad it's working out. Rosa's son, you know." She asked if he could fill in. "Excuse me, I need to speak with someone." She walked away before Harold could finish his sentence. He stood there stunned. Had she really just dismissed him? Did she have any idea what she had in her home right now? Another guest, a tech entrepreneur named Kevin, approached Margaret with his phone out. "Have you heard this pianist play? He's incredible. People are already posting videos online." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that's just the help, son. My housekeeper mentioned he plays piano, so when our regular pianist canceled, I let him fill in. Nice of me, right?" She laughed. "I mean, everyone deserves a chance to practice their hobbies." Kevin's smile faded. "His hobbies?" "Margaret, this kid is playing at a professional level, maybe beyond that." "That's sweet," Margaret said, already looking past him at someone else she needed to talk to. "But let's be realistic. Background music is background music. It's nice, but it's not exactly Carnegie Hall material. Now, if you'll excuse me." Kevin watched her walk away, then looked back at Diego, who was now playing an original piece that had half the room mesmerized. He shook his head slowly and pulled out his phone to record his own video. By 10 p.m., Diego had been playing for an hour and 15 minutes. His back was starting to ache and his fingers were tired, but he didn't want to stop. This piano was so responsive, so perfect. Every touch produced exactly the sound he imagined. It was like the instrument was reading his mind. Rosa had moved closer, standing at the edge of the crowd. Several guests had asked her who the pianist was, and each time she answered with quiet pride, "That's my son Diego." Some of them looked surprised. A few looked uncomfortable, as if they didn't know how to respond to the housekeeper claiming the talented musician as her own. Harold pushed through the crowd and stood directly in front of the piano, waiting for Diego to finish his current piece. When the last note faded, he started clapping enthusiastically. Others joined in, and suddenly the whole room was applauding. Diego looked up, startled. His face flushed red. He hadn't expected anyone to actually pay attention. "Young man," Harold said warmly, "that was absolutely magnificent. I'm Harold Zhang. I conduct the Metropolitan Orchestra." Diego finished, his eyes going wide. "I know who you are. I've watched videos of your performances. You're one of the greatest conductors alive." Harold smiled. "And you, my friend, are one of the most talented pianists I've encountered in 30 years. Where did you study?" Diego's flush deepened. I'm taking some online music theory classes, but mostly I just taught myself." The crowd around them had gone quiet, listening to every word. Harold's eyebrows shot up. "You're self-taught?" "That's impossible. The technical skill alone." "I practice a lot," Diego said quietly. "Whenever I'm not working." "Working where?" Harold asked. "Warehouse. Night shift. Loading trucks mostly." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harold looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "You work in a warehouse? And you play like this?" Across the room, Margaret's assistant was frantically trying to get her attention. "Miss Chen, you need to see this." "The pianist. There are videos going viral. People are asking who he is." Margaret took the phone and scrolled through the social media posts with growing confusion. There were dozens of videos, hundreds of comments, thousands of likes, all about the background music at her party. She read some of the comments. "This is what real talent looks like. Forget the Billionaire's charity event. Someone give this guy a scholarship. The rich people ignoring him while he plays is the most accurate representation of wealth inequality I've ever seen." Margaret's confusion turned to annoyance. This wasn't the narrative she wanted. Tonight was supposed to be about her generosity, her commitment to the arts. Instead, people were making it about some kid playing piano in the corner. She looked across the room and finally, really looked at Diego for the first time. He was talking to Harold Zhang, looking nervous and excited. Rosa stood nearby, beaming with pride. Margaret's jaw tightened. This was spinning out of control, and she didn't like things she couldn't control. Diego woke up the next morning to his phone buzzing nonstop. Half asleep, he reached for it on his nightstand and squinted at the screen. 53 missed calls, 247 text messages. His social media notifications had crashed the app. He sat up in bed, his heart racing. Something was very wrong, or very right. He couldn't tell which. The first message he opened was from his best friend Luis. "Bro, you're famous. Check Twitter right now." Diego's hands shook as he opened the app. The first thing he saw was a video of himself playing piano. It had been viewed 8 million times. 8 million. He couldn't even comprehend that number. He scrolled down and found another video. 5 million views. Then another. 3 million. Every video showed him at that penthouse last night, playing the Steinway grand piano while wealthy people stood around watching. The comment section was overwhelming. "This guy is incredible. Why is he playing background music? He should be headlining concerts." The way everyone ignored him at first and then couldn't stop watching. Chills. Self-taught? Working night shifts? Give this man every scholarship that exists. Diego dropped his phone on his bed and put his head in his hands. He could hear his mother in the kitchen, making breakfast before her shift. She didn't know yet. She didn't know that their entire lives had just changed overnight. He picked up the phone again and kept scrolling. News outlets were picking up the story. Unknown piano prodigy discovered at Billionaire's charity. Gala. Self-taught warehouse worker stuns. Elite party with musical genius. The pianist everyone ignored until they couldn't. Then he saw the articles that made his stomach drop. Billionaire Margaret Chen under fire for dismissive treatment of talented performer. Viral video exposes stark wealth divide at charity event for young artists. People were angry at Margaret. They were calling her out for treating him like background noise, for not recognizing talent when it was right in front of her. Some comments were harsh, others were just disappointed. But the message was clear. The internet had decided she was the villain in this story. Diego didn't want that. He hadn't played piano last night to make anyone look bad. He just wanted to help his mother and play music. "Mijo," Rosa called from the kitchen. "Breakfast is ready." Diego walked out to find his mother staring at her own phone, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at him, and he couldn't tell if she was happy or terrified or both. "Everyone is calling," she whispered. "Everyone. My sisters, my friends, people from church. They're all sending me videos of you. Diego, what's happening?" Before he could answer, his phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Diego Delgado? This is Janet Rivera from the Juilliard School. I hope I'm not calling too early." Diego nearly dropped the phone. Juilliard, the most prestigious music school in the country. Maybe in the world. No, it's fine. I'm awake. I'll get straight to the point. Our entire faculty has watched your videos from last night. Your talent is undeniable. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship effective immediately. Room, board, tuition, everything covered. We can have you enrolled by next semester if you're interested. Diego sat down hard on the couch. His mother was watching him, her hands clutched together like she was praying. Yes, I'm interested. Thank you. Thank you so much." He took down the contact information with shaking hands. After he hung up, 3 more calls came in. A concert hall in Boston wanted him to perform. A record label wanted to discuss a recording contract. A famous pianist he had admired for years wanted to offer him private lessons. Rosa hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. She was crying openly now, years of exhausted hope finally finding release. Her son, her beautiful boy who used to practice on a broken keyboard, was being offered everything she had dreamed for him. But Diego felt something heavy settling in his chest. Joy, yes. Relief, absolutely. But also fear. "Mom," he said quietly, "what about your job? If Margaret gets angry about all this..." Rosa's smile faded. She had worked for Margaret Chen for 15 years. The pay was decent and it covered their bills. More importantly, it was stable. In a city as expensive as New York, stable jobs were worth their weight in gold. "We'll figure it out," Rosa said. But Diego could hear the worry in her voice. Across the city, Margaret was having the worst morning of her professional life. Her PR team had been calling since 6 a.m. Her phone was flooded with messages, most of them negative. The videos from last night had exploded overnight, and she was at the center of a social media storm. She sat in her office, reading comment after comment on her laptop. People were calling her out of touch, elitist, blind to real talent. Some were even questioning her entire charity foundation, asking if she actually cared about supporting young artists or if it was just for show. Her assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to do damage control now." "I'm aware," Margaret said coldly. "The board is concerned. Several donors have called this morning asking questions and..." The assistant hesitated. "The media is asking for comments. The New York Times wants an interview." Margaret closed her laptop with more force than necessary. "This is ridiculous. I gave that boy an opportunity to play. I paid him. How is this my fault?" Her assistant said nothing, which was answer enough. Margaret's PR director, a sharp woman named Catherine, arrived 15 minutes later with a plan. "We positioned this as a feel-good story," she explained, pacing in front of Margaret's desk. "You discovered his talent. You gave him his big break. We arrange a photo op. You and Diego together. You announcing some kind of mentorship or sponsorship program." "Fine," Margaret said. "Set it up." "There's a condition," Catherine added carefully. "He needs to play along. And his mother. Rosa, right? She needs to sign an NDA. We control the narrative going forward. No interviews without approval. No statements that contradict our version of events." Margaret nodded. It made sense from a business perspective. Control the story before the story controlled you. That's how she had built her empire. "Get Rosa in here today," Margaret said. "Let's handle this quickly." That afternoon, Rosa received a text asking her to come to Margaret's office. Her stomach twisted as she rode the elevator up. She knew what this was about. She had worked for wealthy people long enough to understand how these things went. Margaret was sitting behind her massive desk when Rosa entered. Catherine was there too, along with another man Rosa didn't recognize, probably a lawyer. "Rosa," Margaret began, her voice taking on a warm tone that Rosa had rarely heard. "I wanted to talk to you about Diego. His videos are quite impressive." "Thank you," Rosa said quietly, standing with her hands folded in front of her. "I'd like to help him," Margaret continued. "I want to sponsor his musical education, help launch his career, open doors for him that might otherwise remain closed. Rosa's heart should have leapt with joy. This was everything Diego needed. But something in Margaret's tone and the way Catherine was watching her made Rosa hesitate. "That's very generous," Rosa said carefully. Catherine stepped forward with a folder. "We've drawn up an agreement. Margaret will cover all of Diego's expenses, provide connections in the industry, essentially mentor him. In exchange, we need Diego to make some public statements acknowledging Margaret's support and belief in his talent." Rosa took the folder but didn't open it. "Public statements saying what exactly?" "Just the truth," Margaret said smoothly. "That I recognized his gift, that I'm helping him achieve his dreams." "It's a beautiful story, Rosa. Everyone benefits." Rosa opened the folder and started reading. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at her. "Will not make disparaging statements. All public appearances subject to approval. Acknowledgement that opportunity was provided by Margaret Chen." She looked up slowly. "This says Diego has to thank you publicly, that he has to say you discovered him. We're investing a lot in his future," Catherine said. "It's only fair that we protect that investment." Rosa's hands tightened on the folder. For 15 years she had stayed quiet. She had cleaned toilets and folded laundry and smiled politely while being treated like furniture. She had accepted it because it paid the bills, because it gave Diego chances she never had. But this was different. This was asking her to let someone else take credit for her son's talent, for the thousands of hours he had practiced, for the sacrifices they had both made. "No," Rosa said quietly. Margaret blinked. "I'm sorry." "No," Rosa repeated louder this time. Her voice was shaking but steady. "You didn't discover Diego's talent. You didn't even notice it. You told me he was background music. You walked past him all night like he was invisible." The room went very quiet. Catherine looked shocked. Margaret's face hardened. "Rosa, I think you're being emotional right now. Think about what's best for Diego." "I am thinking about Diego," Rosa interrupted. Something was breaking open inside her. 15 years of held-back words. "You didn't ask about him once in 15 years. You never asked me if I had children, what their dreams were, what they needed. You never saw us as real people." "That's not fair," Margaret said, standing up. "I've always treated you with respect." "Respect?" Rosa's voice cracked. "You don't even remember my last name." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't know Rosa's last name. After 15 years, Rosa stood there, her chest heaving, waiting for Margaret to say something. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Catherine stared at her phone, pretending to be busy with something urgent. But Margaret just stood frozen behind her desk, her face pale. "I know my place," Rosa continued, her voice quieter now but no less firm. "I've always known my place. I clean your homes. I make sure everything is perfect for you. And that's fine. It's honest work and I'm not ashamed of it. But my son's talent? That belongs to him. Not to you. Not to anyone else." "Rosa, please sit down," Margaret said, her voice controlled but strained. "Let's discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss," Rosa said, placing the unsigned folder back on the desk. "Diego doesn't need your help anymore. He got into Juilliard on his own. He's getting calls from concert halls on his own. The world saw what you couldn't see." She turned to leave, but Margaret's next words stopped her. "If you walk out that door, you're walking away from your job." Rosa turned back slowly. She had expected this, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. 15 years. 15 years of steady paychecks, of health insurance, of security, gone in an instant because she refused to lie. "I understand," Rosa said softly. She walked out before the tears could fall. The elevator ride down felt like the longest of her life. What had she just done? Diego had opportunities now, yes, but they lived in New York City. The rent alone took most of her paycheck. How would they survive while he was in school? Her mind raced through calculations, through fears, through doubts. But underneath all of that was something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride. She had stood up for her son. She had told the truth. Whatever came next, at least she had done that. When she got home, Diego was on the phone, talking excitedly to someone about rehearsal schedules. He looked up when she walked in, his smile fading when he saw her face. "Mom, what happened?" Rosa sat down on their worn couch and told him everything. Diego's excitement drained away as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You lost your job because of me," he said finally, his voice heavy with guilt. "No," Rosa said firmly, taking his hands. "I lost my job because I chose honesty over lies. That's different. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. But how are we going to—" "We'll figure it out," Rosa interrupted. "We always do. You have a full scholarship now. That's one less thing to worry about. I'll find another job. We'll be okay." Diego hugged her tightly, and Rosa held her son like she used to when he was small and the world felt too big and scary. They would be okay. They had to be. The story hit the news 2 days later. Someone had leaked what happened in Margaret's office. Rosa suspected Catherine trying to get ahead of the narrative, but she couldn't prove it. Either way, the headlines were brutal. Billionaire fires housekeeper. After son's viral piano performance, Margaret Chen demands credit for discovering talent she ignored. Rosa Delgado speaks out. "She didn't even know my last name." That last headline came from an interview Rosa gave to Patricia, the music journalist who had posted one of the first viral videos. Rosa hadn't planned to talk to the media, but Patricia had reached out directly, woman to woman, and something about her felt trustworthy. In the interview, Rosa didn't attack Margaret. She simply told the truth. She explained how she had worked for 15 years, how Diego had taught himself piano, how Margaret had dismissed him as background music. She talked about the NDA, the demand for public statements, the job she lost for refusing to lie. The interview was read by millions. The public response was overwhelming. People started a fundraising campaign for Rosa without her asking. Within 48 hours, it had raised over $200,000. Strangers from around the world sent messages of support, sharing their own stories of being invisible to the wealthy people they served. Margaret watched it all unfold from her penthouse, feeling more alone than she had in years. Her board was furious. 3 major donors had pulled their support from her foundation. Her own daughter, who she barely saw anymore, had sent a text that simply said, "I'm disappointed in you, Mom." That text hurt more than all the news articles combined. Her PR team kept suggesting responses, statements, counter-narratives, but Margaret found herself unable to focus on any of it. She kept thinking about Rosa's words. "You don't even remember my last name." It was true. After 15 years of Rosa cleaning her homes, organizing her life, being present in a way that few people were, Margaret couldn't remember her last name. She had never asked about Rosa's family, her dreams, her struggles. Rosa had been invisible to her, just like Diego had been invisible at the piano. Margaret walked through her penthouse that evening, really looking at it for the first time in months. Everything was perfect. The art on the walls cost more than most people made in a year. The furniture was designer, imported from Italy. The view stretched across Manhattan like she owned the whole city, but it felt empty, cold. She had built this life by focusing on success, on growth, on winning. She had told herself that her charity work made up for the ruthlessness of her business practices. That writing checks to good causes balanced out the way she treated the people closest to her. She had been lying to herself. Margaret's phone rang. It was Harold Zhang, the conductor. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Chen," Harold said, his voice warm but serious. "I wanted to talk to you about Diego." "I'm sure you've read all about it," Margaret said tiredly. "I have. And I'm calling because I think you should come to his debut concert." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Why would I do that?"
"He doesn't need me."
"He doesn't want my help." "This isn't about what he needs," Harold said. "It's about what you need. I've known you for years, Margaret. We've sat on charity boards together. I've watched you write enormous checks while barely paying attention to the causes you're funding. You're brilliant at business, but you've forgotten how to actually see people." "That's quite an accusation," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's an observation," Harold replied gently. "Diego is performing at Carnegie Hall in 3 months. It's going to be extraordinary. Come listen to him. Really listen this time, not as background music, not as a business opportunity. Just listen to what he has to say through his music." After they hung up, Margaret stood by her window looking out at the city lights. 3 months felt like a lifetime away. 3 months for the media storm to die down, for people to forget, for everything to go back to normal. But Margaret was starting to realize she didn't want things to go back to normal. Normal had left her standing alone in an empty penthouse, wondering where everything had gone wrong. The next morning, Margaret did something she hadn't done in years. She wrote a personal note by hand. Not an email, not a text, but actual words on actual paper. The letter was addressed to Rosa. It wasn't an excuse or a justification. It was an apology. A real one. Margaret wrote about how she had been wrong, how she had treated Rosa as invisible, how she had tried to take credit for Diego's talent instead of simply celebrating it. She wrote about her own loneliness, her own failures as a human being. She didn't expect forgiveness. She just needed to say the words. Margaret sealed the letter and left it with her building's doorman to be delivered. Then she did something even more unexpected. She called her daughter. Hello? Her daughter's voice was cautious, surprised. I was wrong, Margaret said simply. About everything. And I want to do better. Can we talk? Really talk? There was a long pause. Then, yes, I'd like that. It was a small step. A tiny one, really, but it was a start. Diego, meanwhile, was drowning in rehearsals. Harold had taken him under his wing, introducing him to musicians and teachers who could help refine his raw talent. Juilliard had welcomed him with open arms. Record labels were competing for his attention, but the most important thing was the music itself. Diego was composing like never before, pouring everything into a debut concert that would tell his story. Not the viral video story or the media drama story, but the real story. The story of a boy who learned piano on a broken keyboard. The story of a mother who worked 3 jobs so her son could dream. The story of invisible people who create beautiful things that the world doesn't see. Rosa found work with a family in Brooklyn, people who treated her with respect, who asked about her son and actually listened to the answers. The money from the fundraiser sat in a savings account, a safety net she had never had before. For the first time in years, she could breathe without worrying about every dollar, and in 3 months her son would play at Carnegie Hall. The thought made her cry every time she remembered it. Happy tears this time. Proud tears. The night of the Carnegie Hall concert arrived with a cold November wind sweeping through Manhattan. Diego stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He wore a simple black suit that Harold had helped him pick out. Nothing too fancy. Nothing that felt like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. Rosa was already seated in the front row, wearing a dress her sisters had pooled money to buy for her. She looked beautiful, her face glowing with pride and nervousness. Around her sat Diego's friends from the neighborhood, people who had watched him grow up, teachers who had encouraged him, co-workers from the warehouse who had covered his shifts when he needed to practice. The concert hall was completely sold out. 2,800 seats, every single one filled. People had flown in from across the country. Music students, professional pianists, journalists, and regular people who had seen the viral videos and wanted to witness something real. Harold found Diego backstage and placed a hand on his shoulder. How are you feeling? Terrified, Diego admitted with a shaky laugh. Good, Harold said with a smile. That means you care. Remember, you're not performing for them tonight. You're sharing your story. Let the music speak. Diego nodded, taking a deep breath. Through the curtain, he could hear the audience settling in, the rustle of programs, the murmur of excited voices. In just a few minutes, he would walk out on that stage, the stage where legends had performed. Where history had been made, a stagehand appeared. 5 minutes, Mr. Delgado. In the audience, Margaret Chen slipped into a seat in the very last row. She had come alone, without her assistant, without her PR team, without anyone who might recognize her. She wore simple clothes and a scarf pulled up around her face. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to be part of the story. She just wanted to listen. The lights dimmed. The crowd fell silent. Diego walked onto the stage and the applause was thunderous. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing, centering himself. Then he began to play. The first piece was his own composition, the one he had played at Margaret's penthouse that night. But this version was different, expanded and deepened. It told the story of his mother walking to work before dawn, of city buses and tired faces, of dignity and exhaustion. The melody was simple but achingly beautiful, and within the first 30 seconds, people in the audience were crying. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. She had heard this piece before months ago, but she hadn't really heard it. She had been too busy, too distracted, too focused on everything except what was right in front of her. Now sitting in the darkness with nowhere to hide, the music hit her like a wave. Diego moved seamlessly into the next piece, a classical work by Chopin, but he played it with such tenderness that it felt new. His fingers danced across the keys with perfect precision, but more than that, with feeling. Every note meant something. Every phrase told a story. Rosa watched her son with tears streaming freely down her face. This was the boy who used to practice on a keyboard with missing keys, who would hum melodies while washing dishes, who never stopped believing even when belief seemed foolish. And now here he was, on one of the most famous stages in the world, showing everyone what she had always known, that he was extraordinary. Diego played for 90 minutes without intermission. He took the audience on a journey through his life, through struggle and hope, through late nights and early mornings, through the invisible world of working people whose hands build everything, but whose names no one remembers. He played angry pieces and joyful pieces, somber pieces and triumphant pieces, and then, near the end, he paused. He stood up and walked to the microphone at the edge of the stage. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said, his voice nervous but clear. "A few months ago I was working night shifts at a warehouse. I played piano on a cheap keyboard in my apartment. I never imagined anything like this was possible." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When that video went viral, everyone wanted to know my story. They wanted to know how I learned, who taught me, what my secret was. But the truth is simple. My mother is my secret." Rosa covered her face with her hands, sobbing openly now. "My mom worked 3 jobs sometimes so I could have a keyboard to practice on. She worked holidays so I could have music books. She believed in me when there was no reason to believe. When I was just a kid making noise in a tiny apartment, everything I am, everything I can do comes from her sacrifice. This concert isn't about me becoming something. It's about honoring what she's always been, a hero." The audience erupted in applause. People stood clapping and cheering. Rosa's friends hugged her while she cried happy tears. In the back row, Margaret was crying too. Not pretty tears, but ugly heaving sobs that she tried to muffle with her hand. She thought about her own daughter, about all the recitals she had missed, all the conversations she had been too busy for. She thought about Rosa, who she had worked with for 15 years without really seeing. Diego sat back down at the piano for his final piece. He had written it specifically for tonight, and he hadn't told anyone what it was about. The title, printed in the program, was simply Invisible. The music started soft and slow, almost like a lullaby. It was the sound of people waking up before dawn, of hands scrubbing floors, of quiet dignity and thankless work. Then the melody began to build, becoming stronger, more insistent. It was those same people refusing to stay invisible, demanding to be seen, declaring their humanity. The piece grew louder and more complex, Diego's hands flying across the keys in a display of technical brilliance. But it never lost its emotional core. It was angry and beautiful and heartbreaking and hopeful all at once. As he played the final notes, Diego thought about everyone who had ever been treated as background noise. Every cleaner, every delivery person, every worker whose labor made the world function but whose faces people never bothered to remember. He played for all of them. The last note rang out in the silent hall, sustaining for a long moment before fading away. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then the entire audience rose as one, applauding with an intensity that shook the walls. It was the kind of standing ovation that performers dream about, the kind that doesn't stop, that goes on until hands hurt from clapping. Diego stood and bowed, tears running down his face. He gestured toward his mother in the front row, and the spotlight found her. Rosa stood overwhelmed as the applause somehow grew even louder. Diego climbed down from the stage and hugged her, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. After the concert, there was a reception in the lobby. Hundreds of people wanted to meet Diego, to shake his hand, to tell him how the music had moved them. Harold was there, beaming with pride. Record executives pressed business cards into Diego's hands. Other musicians wanted to collaborate, but Diego spent most of his time with the people from his neighborhood, the ones who had always believed in him. He talked to the elderly woman who used to let him practice on her piano. He hugged Luis, his best friend who had been there through everything. He thanked his warehouse supervisor who had always scheduled him for shifts that didn't conflict with his online classes. Margaret watched all of this from a distance. She had thought about leaving right after the concert ended, disappearing back into her life. But something kept her there. Finally, as the crowd thinned, she approached Rosa. Rosa saw her coming and tensed slightly. But there was no anger in her eyes, just wariness. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Margaret said quietly. "I don't deserve it. But I needed to tell you in person. I was wrong. About everything. And your son is—" "He's extraordinary, but I think you already knew that." Rosa studied her for a long moment. "Yes," she said simply. "I did. I got your letter," Rosa added. "I read it several times." Margaret nodded, not sure what to say. Sorry felt too small for what she had done. "I don't know if we can be friends," Rosa said slowly. "Too much has happened. But maybe we can both just be better than we were." "I'd like that," Margaret said, and she meant it. Diego appeared then, still glowing from the concert. He looked between his mother and Margaret, understanding passing across his face. "You came," he said to Margaret. "I did, and I really listened this time. Thank you for the music." It was important. Diego nodded, accepting this. There were no dramatic declarations of forgiveness, no Hollywood moments of reconciliation. Just three people standing in the slowly emptying lobby, acknowledging the truth of what had happened and what they had all learned. Margaret left shortly after, walking out into the cold November night. She pulled out her phone and called her daughter. "How did it go?" her daughter asked. "It was beautiful," Margaret said. "He played this piece about invisible people, about the ones we don't see. And I realized I've been invisible too. To myself, to you. I've been so focused on success that I forgot to be human." "Mom," her daughter said softly, "that's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. Can we have dinner this week? Just us, no phones, no business talk. I want to hear about your life, really hear it." "I'd love that." Margaret walked the 20 blocks home instead of calling her driver. She looked at the people she passed on the street, really looked at them. The man selling pretzels from a cart, the woman mopping the floor of a closed diner, the delivery worker loading boxes in the cold. She saw them. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she really saw them. Back at Carnegie Hall, Diego and Rosa stood on the empty stage after everyone had left. The lights were dim, and the seats were vacant, but the energy of the night still hummed in the air. "You did it, mijo," Rosa whispered. "We did it, Mom," Diego corrected. "We always did everything together." They stood there in the silence, mother and son, surrounded by the echo of music that had changed their lives. Outside, the city rushed on, full of invisible people with invisible dreams. But tonight, for a few hours, some of those dreams had become visible, and that made all the difference.